Alrighty, welcome to another evening of lockdown or stay-at-home orders, whatever you want to call it, here in Sydney and here at the Oak Barrel. My name is Scott Fitzsimons, and going to go through a few new arrivals we've had into the store today. As we've done a few of these sorts of videos, basically this is the quickest and easiest way for me to review a few whiskies, get them up on a YouTube, and embed them into the website. So basically, this is the lazy option of what we're doing tonight. So we've got 6 whiskies we're going to go through tonight, 6 whiskey samples from the new Cooper's Choice range arrivals here into Australia and into the Oak Barrel. We've got an Inchgower, a Royal Brackler, a Cameronbridge, a Teaninich, a Royal, a Secret Orkney rather, and a Bunnahabhain, a Peated Bunnahabhain. So we're going to go through each one of those, have a bit of a chat about them. Feel free to ask any questions. But these have just arrived, so that they're going up on the website and onto the shelf as we speak. We're going to kick off by talking a little bit about Cooper's Choice and who they are. So Cooper's Choice is part of the Vintage, I think Vintage Malt Whiskey Company. It's Vintage Malt Whiskey Company. They do a bunch of blending and releases of their own. Probably the most famous in terms of Oak Barrel connections would be the Finlagen releases of Isla single malts. But this is a series of single casks they do, and Cooper's Choice, the name probably gives it away a little bit. Cooper is obviously the name of the people that Cooper barrels into existence from staves or from existing barrels. And part of the idea around Cooper's Choice is having whiskies in traditional casks, so often American oak ex-bourbon thrown into something a little bit different in terms of finish. So I'm trying these for the first time tonight. These are very raw and honest opinions, so we'll see how I go. We're going to kick off with an Inchgower, a 2001 Inchgower, 49.5% alcohol, 700 mils. So this is an ex-bourbon cask into Sauternes barrels. So a 19-year-old. It's a 2001 vintage, bottled in 2021, but it was bottled quite early 2021. So it was actually before April when it was distilled, so it didn't quite get to 20 years. So a 19-year-old. And Inchgower are one of the workhorse distilleries that sort of sits alongside Blair Athol as a very key ingredient in the Bell's releases. Bit of a favourite of mine is if you've watched half of these, you probably know I love those workhorse distilleries and that flavour profile that they go for blends, that sort of very textural, very oily, and sometimes quite fresh. That works very well with the blend. So this is a Sauternes cask. One thing that I find often with Sauternes matured whiskey, whether they're finishes or for longer periods, is a real honey sort of note. So straight off the bat and off the label, that's what I'm going to be looking for here on this one. It is honey. I recently tried a Canmore. It was a I forget what it was something in a Sauternes cask, but that was like really driving honey on the nose. And this is a little bit more restrained. This is a little bit tighter and neater on the nose. It's like honey on something else, not honey on toast necessarily, but honey on top of a cake or something like that. Fair bit of malt. It's at 19 years old. It's very, very soft, very sort of pulled back and restrained and elegant. Very aromatic, very classy sort of nose. There's no rough edges. There's no angry bits in this. As we got six samples, and thank you to Simon from the importer here for sending me these samples to go through. But I'm going through these for the first time. We're going to rush through them reasonably quickly to get them all in. But it means that sometimes these whiskies actually evolve and grow with time. And I dare say this one might be one I need to come back to at the end because it's got a bit of. There's a bit going on. There was a bit of like a gristiness as well, a bit of barley husk. A very pretty, very elegant nose. I could spend a lot of time on this. Part of the love of whiskey is about drinking less but drinking better, and certainly this is a whiskey I could nose for a long time. $49.5, so certainly not too hot on the palate, anything like that. There's a bit of dankness, a bit of like wet grass, and then confectionery sort of sweetness, like an Allen's mixed retro lolly bag sort of thing just opened up, and you get that sort of amalgamation of different flavorings and that sort of thing coming through. Quite enjoying this. As I say, 19, probably just a couple of months shy of its 20th birthday. We don't know how long it's been in Saturn's cask. I don't think, to be honest, this has been in there for too long. You definitely get that honey, almost honeysuckle when you rub it between your fingers, that sort of aroma, but it's not overpowering, so I don't think it's been a big sort of release. We'll jump in and see what they say about it for in their official tasty notes. Green apples and honeydew melon on the nose, grapefruit and citrus zest, gentle spice, ginger notes, touch of hay, slight saltiness to the tail. So, yeah, definitely that aromatic nose that, I sort of agree with. I don't get too much of the ginger spice, to be honest. Not a huge amount of spice for me on the palate, but that touch of hay, that was that freshness I was sort of alluding to that I was getting on the back end of that finish. And it was a grassiness that I said, but yeah, I can definitely see how you could describe that as hay as well. It's actually quite decadent on the finish. It's quite a rich, full-flavored finish, which is sort of what you want and you kind of expect from a 19, virtually 20-year-old whiskey. Super moist, but that's a really long, and that honeysuckle I was talking about comes back, but it's more of the, it's got like a caramel richness to it as well, like a fortified honeysuckle, if that's a thing. I'm pretty sure it's not, but that's sort of what I'm sort of leaning towards on this. But yeah, more of that. When you go back to the slightly empty glass, there's a bit of that grassiness as well, grassiness or fresh cut hay, whatever you want to call it. But very enjoyable. I think that's an excellent way to kick off. That's a really elegant, stately sort of whiskey with bright fruits and sweetness, but nothing out of line. It's with the Saturn's cask, you see it sometimes and you go, okay, this is going to be a really big honey bomb. But it's not. There's nothing out of place there. I think that's a very, very good whiskey. And I sort of am winging it a little bit with the order tonight. I haven't tried any of these before, so we're giving it a go from scratch. But yeah, I think that's as I said, we might need to come back to that one. Next whiskey we're going to move on to, I think, is we're going to go a little bit younger into a 2014 Royal Brackler in a Madeira cask. I'm doing this one second because it is sitting at 55%, as you can probably see on screen there. So it's got a little bit more oomph to it, or at least I'm expecting it to. Where are we with the Brackler? Madeira cask. Now, these Madeira casks can go a few different ways in how they sort of present themselves. So unlike the Saturn's cask where you've sort of got honey in your head before you even open the bottle, we're a little bit more open-minded with this one, so to speak. Royal Brackler is a famous distillery. It was actually the first distillery to gain a royal warrant in, I think, 1835, which therefore was allowed to change its name from Brackler into Royal Brackler. Distilleries like Royal Lochnagar and Glenurie Royal over history as well have also had that sort of honour bestowed upon them, but Brackler was the first one. Take a look at the label here. Let's see what we can decipher straight from the label. It's a 2014 vintage, bottled in 21 as a 7-year-old. We're in American oak with a finish in Madeira cask. Again, not too sure how long in the Madeira cask. The whiskey will probably tell us. 324 bottles in the outturn at 55%, bang on the nose. So, oof. If that Inchgower I just tried was very elegant and stately, this is teenage. This is youth and rebellious. It's a punchy nose. There's big malty sort of notes, but then that sort of sticky, like a sticky sweetness, which I can only assume is coming from the Madeira cask. Royal Brackler can sort of go in a few ways, and I have to admit I'm not the hugest fan of the official Brackler releases. I think they're good without necessarily being exceptional, and not for any flaws, just for being a little bit one-dimensional sometimes. This is certainly not one-dimensional. Whatever they've done here, well, I know what they've done here. The thrown in a Madeira cask is certainly on the bigger end of the scale. That sticky sweetness. Bit of tropical fruit there, but sort of like underripe tropical fruit. It's quite zesty. It's quite vibrant. 55. It's big. It's jumpy without necessarily being hot. I'll take a thing on the palate, see if that holds true. But yeah, it's a pretty expressive nose. Just like a concentrated sweetness there. Can't quite put my finger on it. It's like a quite intense dried honey sort of note, or like almost like a burnt caramel sort of thing. Finish shows a little bit of spice. Maybe because we spoke about ginger on the last one, I'm leaning towards that because it's fresh in the memory. But I can certainly see a little bit more of the ginger spice on this this release, and I'm going to go back to that Madeira. Certainly, I think more than the Inchgower with that Sauternes cask. I think Madeira cask it's had its say a little bit more prominently here. Let's have a look at the official tasting notes, see what they come up with for this. As I just find it, there's a few in this release, so it takes a little bit longer to actually search it down. So here we are. So aromatic spices with light sherry notes. Yep, that's on the nose palate. Caramel fudge with malted barley, more spices and Madeira cake. Spices linger with oak and dried fruit. So yeah, definitely like that fudgy sort of caramel note that I was picking up on, and there's quite a bit of spice on it. Interesting, they sort of note a bit of sherry type aroma on the nose, and I guess you never know whether they're talking about sherry cask influence or actual sherry. Because like going back to this, I can see a little bit of influence, not necessarily from a cask point of view, but actually drinking real Fino and Amontillado. There's quite nutty, dry styles of sherries. I can see some similarities on the nose here with that sort of balance of malt and spice. But yeah, I think the Madeira's had quite a big influence here. I think this is a really cool little. It's a bit crazy. It's a little bit all over the place, but at 55%, I think it's a really cool little experience of what the Brackler is, and certainly a different take. It's certainly one of the more interesting Bracklers I've had. When sometimes they can be, as I mentioned, a little bit on the safe side, and there's nothing wrong with that. Some of my favourite whiskies are very safe whiskies, but this is certainly not a safe version from this distillery. Again, both of these two, I'm definitely going to get back to that Inchgower because that's got a long way to develop. I might have a look at this because it's very youthful and teenagery at the moment. It's got a lot to say without necessarily opening its mouth wisely. But I reckon that's going to develop as well. But let's move on to the number 3 whiskey, which is our oldest we're going to try. In hindsight, probably should have done this before the Brackla because that was pretty punchy, and we don't know exactly what we're going to get from here. But we are on to a Camembridge 1992. 28-year-old single grain, 288 bottles in around 48.5. This is a rare example from, or at least in this outturn, the Cooper's Choice, where there isn't a cask finish. This is a straight bourbon maturation, a bourbon single cask. And I tell you what, I am loving these single grains that we're starting to see in Australia. I've been jumping up and down about them for a couple of years, and we're starting to see a little bit more come in, not just from Cameronbridge, but Canberra and Invergordon and Port Dundas and these sort of places. And because the single grains are distilled almost to the level of vodka, you're getting up to between 92 and 95% alcohol, depending on which distillery you're at. So when you're getting to that level, you're getting quite close to a neutral spirit. So when you mature that for 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years, you get a bit more of a consistency between those whiskies, as opposed to something like a Inchgower or a Royal Brackler, where because the whiskey is so far, or the new maker is so far away from being neutral, you get all these intricacies and developments that happen. So it's really interesting. You tend to start to understand what you're going to get from these whiskies at this age, and luckily it's always great. I haven't had a bad one. I've seen some people throw some weird cast finishes at it. I really like, at least on paper, I really like the fact that they've avoided that temptation. They've just gone straight with a bourbon cask here. As I say, at 48.5, 288 bottles. And it doesn't matter whether it's a single grain or single malt, 28 years and 1992, that's a long time. That this is an old whiskey that has spent a lot of time waiting for us to drink it. And exceptional value in the single grains as well for these sorts of releases. Oh. Yeah, exactly what it says on the tin, and the nose is so aromatic and so pungent that it doesn't even really matter that it was behind that slightly crazy Royal Brackler. It's whipped cream, Werther's Originals, butterscotch, vanilla essence, that Queen's vanilla essence type stuff. Baking like tea cake, but the actual batter rather than the finished product. Super, super decadent. I mean, if you like, if you're the sort of person that gets, croissants made out of butter and then puts more butter on them, old single grains is where you need to be, because these are just so buttery and creamy on the nose. They're so elegant. A real treat. A real treat. Palate is very much the same. There's a bit of spice there, a bit of like peppercorn or pepperberry sort of spice there at the end to give it a bit of a pull through on the palate and lead into that finish. Finishes on the shorter side. That's what we expect from single grains. Without single malts made from malted barley, they give that beautiful finish. They give that length and that structure. It's not necessarily what we're looking for in single grains. What we're looking for is there's very front forward whiskies. They're very pungent aromatic noses, and this certainly falls into that camp. But you could nose this all day. You pour this over ice cream. This is really I'm waxing lyrical a bit, and I'm a bit of a sucker for these older single grains. I just think they're exceptional in flavour and structure, but even in value. And eventually, when we are talking about whiskey, we do need to talk about price and value and what that equates to. But even taking that out of the equation, I think these are exceptional. All right, let's look and see what the official tasting notes are. See if we match up. I didn't give too many tasting notes. Very much a textural whiskey for me rather than big flavours. Nose is vanilla custard and buttered cookies with oaky spices. Yep, tick. Palate, shortbread, pastry and vanilla sponge. Bourbon notes with a touch of citrus. Yep, finish popcorn, buttery smooth with brown sugar. Yeah. They've extrapolated my thoughts a little bit bigger than I probably was prepared to. But, yeah, just a gorgeous whiskey. And, if you're in a position where you haven't tried whiskey over 20 years old, and there's a lot of people that hasn't, because it's a very expensive thing to do, is to drink old whiskey these days. This is a really great way to see that elegance and that refinement from an old whiskey without spending. Like if it was a 28-year-old Scotch whiskey, we were getting very, very close to $1,000. Sorry, not Scotch, a single malt whiskey. We're getting close to $1,000, sometimes well over, depending on the distillery and the specs behind it. But we're talking about a whiskey here, if I can bring it back up again, that we're selling for sub 250 for members. So that's and 238. So that's a really, really cool little whiskey. Yeah, that's designed to be shared with friends on that one. All right, let's move on to number 3. And wasn't exactly sure where to put this one in the lineup. We're going to Teaninich, one of my favourite distilleries. A sherry cask finish this time as well. So I thought the sherry cask normally takes a little bit more weight. We'll go a little bit further down the line. So one of my favourite distilleries. I say that about a lot of distilleries, but I genuinely am a sucker for these Diageo workhorses. There's a reason why Johnny Walker is, and some of their brands are some of the biggest brands in the world, is because the ingredients that go into them are exceptional. And Teaninich goes into a lot of different blends. We see it a little bit. It's a distillery that's quite old, but is undergoing big revamps at the moment. It's going to become one of the biggest distilleries or malt distilleries in Scotland. In terms of its its new make, its character. What does it taste like in its fall? Because not a lot of people will have formed an opinion about what Teaninich can be, because there's physically not that many around to get an idea. But generally quite a grassy, light sort of spirit. But again, has that oiliness. One of my top 3 distilleries, Linkwood, is part of the same family. Often has the same sort of descriptors around it, grassiness, but after time it gets that elegance and that oiliness and that sort of thing. For me, Teaninich's a little bit rawer. It's probably not as refined as some of the Linkwoods. So Teaninich has that grit, but it means that I think I actually prefer Teaninich when it's thrown into these sorts of situations with sherry casks and other finishes in it, as I prefer my Linkwood pretty unadulterated, pretty spirit driven. So let's look at the bottle here. Let's see if we can glean from that. We're talking about a 2009 vintage, distilled April 2009, American oak with additional aging in sherry cask, 11 years old, 47.5, one of 258 bottles. So 47.5 is a slightly lower ABV than you'd expect. Could just be class placement. Teaninich being a blender's mold, it's bought and sold. These barrels go all over Scotland, so I don't know where it was matured exactly. It also, the word natural cask strength doesn't appear on this front label, so they might have decided that this is the right ABV to bottle this at, which I have no issue with at all. Again, I'm just speculating here. That might be completely incorrect. But that's sort of could be an option as well. Now, I took these photos today of these bottles, so they are all using the same light settings and light levels. I do that just in these little packets, just to show you, give pretty honest examples of what the colours are. So we can see, we're going the wrong way there. We can see the Inchgower had that sort of that hue from the Sauternes, Madeira as well. The Cameronbridge, even though it was a bourbon cask, necessarily wouldn't probably give as much as Sauternes as Madeira. They were finishes. This is 28 years in the bourbon, so it's definitely given that colour. But you can see there is a distinct darkness on the Teaninich. So however long this sherry finish has been, it's certainly had its say. So let's give it a go. And first impressions are always quite important. I actually don't pick too much sherry off the note here, off the top here. I just might have topped that up a little bit, but I'm getting that classic Teaninich grassy grit, that sort of that workhorse, that sort of that almost that look into the window of a whiskey that was never really intended to be drunk like this. It was designed to be a blender's malt, and maybe some of it escapes for single malt, but its DNA is built around creating a style of whiskey and a distillate that is going to bind flavors together and work well with partners. And I love that, because you almost get to look into this rawness and these like unpolished gems, for lack of a better metaphor. Yeah. With a bit of time, you're getting more of that sherry. In this case, the sherry is showing itself a little bit of a wood polish sort of note. It's not the dried fruit. It's not the raisins, at least initially. It's got that wood polish sort of thing. A little bit resinous. Very alluring, though. It's got like just that hint of sweetness, or that illusion of sweetness, that's providing a really like seductive sort of nose here. Quite a clean palate. The back and the finish has spice, a little bit more of that dankness you sometimes associate with sherry, that sort of wine cellar sort of note. But yeah, a bit of like peppery spice at the back on the finish, but the introduction to the palate and that sort of feel across the tongue is very coating. It's very elegant. We're jumping down a little bit. We've been up as high as 55% with the Royal Brackler. We're down at 47.5. So I think that sort of helps in this context. Absolutely no heat whatsoever. Like the jumpiness is spice. It's not heat. Very, very enjoyable. Again, it's a Teaninich. It's a whiskey that you sort of need to work towards and really peel the layers back to understand it. It's got some, it does have some sharp edges in there where it's sort of fighting back against the sherry cask and looking for something to do. But yeah, I'm loving this sort of this raw, unpolished gem of a sherry finished Teaninich here. Let's dive in and see what the official tasty notes sort of lend themselves to on this 11-year-old. Nose, overripe fruits, barley, sugars, and light sherry notes. Yeah, 100% agree with that. The sherry influence is very light. Palate, more sherry with boiled sweets, mouth-watering malty sweetness with a touch of coconut. Good length, more fruit and spice. Yeah, on the finish there. Yeah, I agree with that sort of thing. And I think I was probably denying it. They're pointing out a little bit more sweetness than I was sort of alluding to, but I think it's there, particularly on the palate, not on the nose. The nose is actually quite savoury. Compared to some other sherry casks, that wood polishy sort of resiny note is at least what I'm getting is there, but it's not overpowering. It's not intensely sweet. Yeah, like a window. I think this is not the whiskey for everyone. This is not a whiskey for people who are at maybe the start of their whiskey journey. I think some of the joy and the fun of this whiskey is probably for those who are willing to invest a bit of time into it, who are going to sort of peel back those layers, as I say, and sort of pick it apart and understand it for what it is. But I'm very, very enjoyable. Like, it's probably the most thought-provoking of the four we've had so far. The one I want to, if I want to get back to the Inchgower and sort of just sit with it, I want to just enjoy the Cameronbridge, the Royal Brackler. I want to sort of have another run up at. This one I almost want to pick apart mathematically or scientifically and figure out what's going on, because it is a very, very, very fascinating dram. And again, I'm loving I love the fact that it's Teaninich, it's gone into a sherry cask, but they haven't drowned what is great about Teaninich. They haven't overpowered it. It's still sitting there in the essence of what that distillery is and what it looks like and what its function in the wider scope of Scotch whiskey is still evident in this whiskey. I'll just finish this off. We've got two more to go. We've got a secret Orkney and then a very heavily peated Bunnahabhain to get to. Both of which, if the secret Orkney is what I might suspect it is, I'm expecting there to be a little bit of smoke on that. So I'm going to sit with this just for 2 seconds longer before I go, because I may not be able to come back straight away to it. Yeah. It's almost like a puzzle, that whiskey. And I've got all the bits, but I don't really know where to put them. I haven't quite put them all together yet. So that Teaninich is it's quite an interesting little whiskey, but it's one that's provoking a few thoughts for me. So let's move on to our next whiskey now. This is a secret Orkney. Again, it's another one, just like the Camembridge, that doesn't undergo a finish of any type. This is just a straight bourbon cask maturation. 2005 vintage, bottled earlier this year in 2021. So we're talking about a 15-year-old as of its bottling date. 360 bottles at 56% from a secret Orkney. Now, I've been in a very lucky position to try a lot of secret or undisclosed Orkneys in the past sort of 5 years or so, and they almost certainly all come from the same place. Two distilleries on Orkney at the moment, Highland Park and Scarpa, and I have not seen any independent Scarpa for a very long time. In fact, the awesome Gordon MacPhail Scarpa I can't get my hands on for love nor money at the moment. So I'm not going to assume that this might be Highland Park. We're going to wait and try it to see what happens. Basically, the signifier will be here if there's any hint of heather and smoke, because Highland Park use peats a portion of their own malts in the proportion they use their own maltings for, and the Orkney peat is very heathery, just for the matter of the way that island is and where it's situated in the world, and lashed by wind and rain. You don't get trees, but the heather sort of covers the earth. So we find any of those notes, we can be pretty safe. We know where this is coming from. Yeah, this is Highland Park. This is pretty straight off the bat. I mean, I could be wrong. I have nothing to go on it apart from the nose, but there's like a gravelly, subtly smoky. I'm not going to say the word heathery because that's just a cop out. But yeah, like a gravelly, sort of earthy smoke. Bit of petrichor to this as well, which often I get with those whiskies that have that sort of gravelly element. You know, somewhere between there and lavender. I get it a lot with Kilkerran Glengyle with their fantastic 12-year-old and those work in progresses. I see a lot of similarities in this in terms of that flavour. Really, really good nose. I've said it on the record a couple of times at tastings and things. I was a huge fan of Highland Park. A little bit disillusioned with some of the releases that sort of appeared about five years ago, with ABVs dropping and fermentation seemed to be squeezing up a little bit. And I mean, these are decisions made in years prior that came to fruition in 12 and 18 and 21-year-olds that we saw. But Highland Park, some of the new releases are really coming to the fore. And I think for the purists and the real lovers of that distillery, it's the independents that have kept them in tune and really holding on to it. And this is a great example of this distillery, at least on the nose. Like just that nose, it's got all the things. It's not, we're at 56%, and that obviously helps it. It's not wimpy. It's not limp like some of the others. It's not watery. It's got that oomph and that texture, and that really helps bring that earthiness out, that sense of place. Highland Park, and if it is from Highland Park, I don't know. It's a secret Orkney, but whiskies like Highland Park and like Springbanks from Campbelltown and like Isla whiskies and like Ardnamurchan, these whiskies are at their best when they're really representing the sense of place where they come from. And this is a whiskey that really sort of shows off that and really gives the impression of, this is, you couldn't distill something like this in Australia. You couldn't distill something like this in other parts of Scotland. This has to come from an island somewhere. Has to come from Orkney. Really, really elegant nose. This is up there with some of the North Star releases we had recently. Those really precise Orkneys that have come through in the past 24 months or so. First impression, I'm still nosing. I know I should rush through these, and I will taste in a second. But this is one I'm in no rush to take a sip of this. I'm just really enjoying this nose. A bit more florals and that sort of thing coming through. Maybe a little bit of citrus, but it's very mild. It's like a really English garden sort of. I'm gonna lean towards like that lavender sort of thing as well. Maybe a bit of rose in there. Let's dive in. Yep. Largely more of the same. There's a bit of acid at the end, saltiness, that sort of coastal note. The smoke is there, but it's like a bed of smoke, a smouldering sort of embers thing that is unique. It's notable because it's there, but it's actually lifting other flavors around it. You're not going, oh, that's a smoky whiskey. The smoke's the most important thing there. The smoke is the bed that's lifting the other elements around it. Really, really good. Really, really good Highland Park there. I mean, I don't know if I'm allowed to be saying this again. This is all personal opinion. I think this is a secret Orkney. I think this is Highland Park. I don't think it's Scapa. Let's good long finish as well. As I was just sort of saying that, it just kept coming to me. I should note that before I let's go look at what the official tasting notes say. This 2005 15-year-old secret Orkney. Light heathery smoke. I was staying away from the heathery note, but they've gone for it. With vanilla, lemon notes and salt on the nose. Palate, peppery spices and citrus notes. Subtle smoke with hints of sea salt and graphite. Delicious. Yeah, I was going that gravelly thing. They've gone graphite. Yeah, really, really. I agree with that. Tick that. Finish, good length, more salt, citrus, and faint smoke. Yeah, so like this is not a whiskey that is changing from nose to palate to finish. The elements are all there and they're carried through. Some of the other whiskies, particularly that Royal Brackler was a little bit, crazy and jumpy. That changed from element to element. This very much holds its ground. Just a really, really enjoyable whiskey. And every time you sort of go, I haven't had a good Highland Park in a while, it's something like this that drags you back. No, this is why you love this distillery. This is why the people that love Highland Park are absolutely bolted on diehards, and they would never ever sway from their pure obsession with this distillery. And for me, it's these sort of releases that show why that is. Really, really cool expression. It's not, it's not the most refined Highland Park. It's not the most refined whiskey. It's not the prettiest. It's gritty. It's earthy. It's a little bit understated, but it is so of its time and of its place. And I really think, and unfortunately for the accountants and the people making the decisions out there, I really think Highland Park is a distillery that should only really be enjoyed at cask strength, or at least over 47, 48%, because it just loses this DNA that I love when it's below there. Yeah. Very. I want to say a couple of quick g'days as well that I've been looking at the chat too much. G'day to Whiskies My Jam tuning in there, and to Crafty Field as well, who I think is sitting in the car in COVID lockdown at the moment. We got one more whiskey to go to. I don't really want to finish this Highland Park. Whiskies My Jam says, glad the secret Orkney is good, featuring a live Highland Park tasting here in Tas in a few weeks. Well, yeah, I mean, I can't honestly say Whiskies My Jam that is a Highland Park, but if it's not, you can name my firstborn. I'm not very good at blind tastings, but we've only got 2 to choose from on Orkney. I'm pretty confident in this. But yeah, this is, I think this would be really cool to show as a very pure expression of the distillery. Alrighty, let's move on to the final whiskey, which is a Bunnahabhain. So a 2013, a heavily peated Bunnahabhain. Let's see what we can glean off the label. Distilled October 2013. When it was bottled in 2021, that made it a 7-year-old. 318 bottles at 53.5%. Now, Bunnahabhain, famously big Isla distillery. They do they split their production between peated and unpeated. It's a different sort of smoke that you see in their peated releases than some of the other ones. For me, it often can be a little bit more earthy, a little bit more grounded, a little bit more, sometimes, and I'm not saying that, things like Lafroig, Kalila and Lagavulin are not powerful at all, but their smoke can be very precise and very intricate, whereas I've often found some of these Bunnahabhains have a very broad, brooding sort of smoke. So this is, again, a whiskey that is, it's not a finish. It's heavily peated, and funnily enough, for an independent bottler called Cooper's Choice that often plays with a lot of cask finishes, you can see by the colour on this, and I'll bring it up on the big screen again, the cask has had very little to say. It matured in a bourbon cask. I'd be very surprised if this wasn't some sort of refill. You can see the colour there, and I'll scroll back to, that's another bourbon cask it's double the age, admittedly, but it really it's hard to pick this one off the white background in this photo. Oh, it's big. I think part of the maybe using a refill barrel here was to keep as much smoke in it to a pure form. I can tell this is going to be a spirit-driven whiskey, which is what I sort of like straight off the note. But even from that first nose, it's actually a little bit more coastal than I sort of picked it. But it's oysters, it's iodine. There's a meatiness, but meaty like steak over charcoal sort of thing. It's like you get that charcoaly sort of element coming through on the nose. Bit of kippers. There's a bit of salty sea note in here, not anchovy, but maybe like kippers or something like that. With some friends last year, we made a few pizzas and things together in a bit of a weekend. And one of the discoveries of 2020 for me was anchovy paste. That sort of came out, and people like anchovies or they don't. But I'm a big fan, and I'm sort of getting that same sort of element, that, you know, meat on a pizza with anchovy paste over the top. Yeah, it's actually the more you nose, it's actually quite funky. This is not a clean peat bomb by any sense. There's a bit of funk here. Bit of sweetness on the palate, like a bit of lemon lollies and that sort of thing. Smoke is still there. There's still a lot of smoke. As I said, we're at 53.5%. I actually think a couple of drops of water would bring out more pure smoke. There's plenty of peat, earthy funk on this, but in terms of pure smoke, I think a bit of water would actually bring that out a little bit more. Quite a lingering finish. It's got quite a good length on it. It's well and truly still there. But yeah, that sort of oyster shell thing, and not oysters, the meat, the muscle. It's the shell with that little bit of seawater left in it when they're freshly shucked and consumed. And maybe it's that, you know, sometimes when I'm not a very good shucker of oysters, but I've shucked my fair few. Sometimes where you don't get the angle right and you get a bit of like oyster shell in there, is a bit of grit. I think that sort of lingering aroma of that bit of seawater left in with that saltiness and a bit of oyster shell grit still left in there. It's alongside that charcoal barbecue sort of thing. I mean, it's a big whiskey. It's a very big whiskey. Let's have a look at the official tasting notes here of what we have got for this 2013 7-year-old. Knows peat smoke and sea salt with vanilla and fishing nets. Yeah, I didn't think of fishing nets, but that's exactly what I was trying. It took me 5 minutes to describe what they just did in 2 words. Palate, more peat, fresh and vibrant with tropical fruits and smoking spices, smoked ham and tar, finish long and lingering smoke and sweetness. Yeah, I think that's probably a very, very good. I 100% agree with that sort of description of this whiskey. A very, like Cooper's Choice, we haven't had a bad one so far. I think for me, the standouts probably from this was the Inchgower, the first one we did, the 19-year-old. I think that's actually a really elegant whiskey. I think there's probably an element that I knew I was going to like the Camembridge, just because I've had so many of specs similar to that, and I know that the flavour and the value is so spectacular there. So my hopes there were quite high. I think the Inchgower was the one that surprised me the most. And I could spend a lot of time on that. The Teaninich, I need to pull apart a little bit in that puzzle, but very, very enjoyable. What else do we try? The Royal Brackler, that was probably the most intriguing of the bunch. Probably the one that was the most unexpected. I probably, in hindsight, would put that maybe third, even fourth, behind the Cameronbridge and Teaninich if I was doing this again. But then the Orkney, I think that's it's just such a great example of what Highland Park can be and what should be more often. In a way that's not going to potentially set the world alight. You're not going to see it named best whiskey of the decade, but just a really great expression of a whiskey that comes from a sense of place and time. And then this Bunna, which is pretty wacky, pretty funky. I mean, look at that color. You could almost, this is a whiskey for people who drink agricole rum and Clarin and that sort of stuff. This has got a bit of funk to it. But very, very enjoyable. Look, we're gonna wrap up there. Thank you very much for those who are watching live, for putting up with my ramblings. This is, as I say, the easy way. Instead of doing this not live and then uploading the videos one by one, this is a far easier way to do this. All these whiskies are in store now. They went up online this evening, this afternoon. Made the rush to get them up. There's a few others from this from the Cooper's Choice release that are also up there. But we'll probably push it out in an email to our whiskey mailing list soon. But thank you for joining me. Enjoy the rest of your whiskey. Quick hello to David and/or Caroline Taylor down in Tassie there. One of the few places in the world that isn't in, or in Australia that isn't in lockdown or stay at home at the moment. Stay safe, and we will see you all very, very soon. Cheers.